You see it?
Yeah.
Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. Men wanted, for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. That was the ad that Shackleton placed in trying to find his crew for his expedition to the Arctic. Surprisingly, he got over 5,000 responses, even with an ad like that. The back of the book says that it's a thrilling account of one of the most astonishing feats of exploration and human courage ever recorded, which is a pretty tall statement considering that there's a lot of situations in our history that could make the same claim. For example, the moon landing, sailing to America, and so on. But I think after reading this book, you might agree. Shackleton and his men, all 27 of them, were missing for nearly 2 years, during which they were stranded in pack ice and watched their ships slowly sink, stuck on an island, and then again with Shackleton's attempt to sail the roughest seas in the world in only a 22-foot round-bottom sailboat. And if you know anything about sailing and sailboats, you'll know the boat that he sailed with 5 men just to get help for the rest of his men that he left back on Elephant Island was not the kind of boat that you want to take on those seas. Swells can reach up to 80 feet and has well earned the title of roughest seas in the world. There's no land to slow down the winds, and it churns endlessly, building and growing, and is often where modern-day yacht sailors are either demasted or lose their ships on world races. So the closer you get to the poles with those races, the faster you go. However, the rougher the conditions, greater chance of icebergs, and so on. And these guys did it in basically a cannibalized lifeboat. They used rocks as a ballast and sailed 800 miles. And that sail alone took 16 days. Now, I've read a lot of books, or listened to them, I should say, on Audible or whatever. And this book probably rates on my top 5 favorite books of all time. Before getting the book, I knew Shackleton was an explorer from way back when, and that's about the end of the extent of my knowledge on the guy. I had never heard of this book. It was suggested to me on my Audible suggestions based on other books that I had got it on a whim and listened to the thing straight through. Now that I've completed it, I almost feel like this should be required reading for anyone who's in any kind of a management position of any kind, anywhere where they're in charge of managing people. Shackleton was truly an Ultraman. I know that sounds corny, but when you read the book, I think you'll agree. Now, a lot of preparation went into preparing for the expedition to the Arctic. But like I said, there's 5,000 guys that responded to the ad, which, by the way, I have to wonder if that ad was placed now, if they'd get 5,000 responses. But he picked his crew with sitting down for these guys for often no more than 5 minutes, and he already knew if he was going to take them along just based on that little conversation. For example, one guy was an astrologist, or wasn't an astrologist, but that's what they needed. He interviewed him for 5 minutes and hired him, even though the guy had very little experience, but he liked his attitude. So the old saying, hire for attitude, train for skill, that's exactly how he felt. The guy ended up taking a course before boarding the Shackleton, and from what the book says, he ended up being pretty good. After reading it, you think, there's no way this could have happened. It's one of those stories where if they weren't on an expedition and had all the recording devices, and nobody would believe them. It sounds too fantastic to be real. But it happened. They were missing for 2 years. Not a soul was lost. All 27 men. Stuck in ice. They all piled onto lifeboats and were stranded on Elephant Island. He left his men there. And the format that it's written so well by this author that I had never heard of, that when they're talking about freezing to death at the bottom of this stupid 22-foot boat in wet sleeping bags, it almost makes you feel like you need to go get a blanket yourself. Now, it is a little bit of a guy's book. It's manly men doing manly things, piling on a crappy boat just to say they're the first people on the South Pole, which, by the way, they failed. But still, somehow, it's considered a success because of the endurance and the survival, and like I said, because Shackleton didn't lose any guys. There's a ton of good quotable lines in this book. Like, for example, I think Shackleton told his men, "By enduring, we conquer." And another funny thing about the ship, the Endurance, I think they mentioned that he bought it for $65,000, which by today's standards, you can barely get a decent truck for that. And the wages that his men got was $700, roughly, depending on what their skills were, for the entire year. Oh, and by the way, they were paid if they survived, and only if they survived on their return trip. This count really lionizing the Shackleton. For example, there's a part where apparently one of the guys that was on the expedition stowed away, somehow hid on the ship long enough to where they're so far out they couldn't turn around. And when Shackleton found him, he blew his top, screaming at the guy, berated him in front of the entire crew. And then finally, when he was done, he told them, if we run out of food on this expedition, we're eating you first. And then he put them to work in the kitchen, or in the galley, preparing meals for the rest of the ship. Just imagining the crew standing outside watching the ship get crushed by ice. It wasn't like you'd imagine a quick sinking. They camped around the ship and watched it slowly get crushed, the ice expanding and heaving on the hull until finally it sank. Even had enough time to take plenty of pictures. It must have been torturous knowing that they weren't going to be able to get on it and sail away if or when the ice finally melted. Like I said, this is one of those books that stands out as exceptional, for my opinion, and I cannot explain just how surprised I was stumbling across this book and getting on a whim from an author that I'd never heard of and basically being blown away. But hey, that's just me. Let me know in the comments below if you've read it. This is probably going to be one of those reviews where I get 10 views, which is really a shame. But the 10 of you that watch the review, let me know what you think of it. I'll talk to you next time.